Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Redneckologist show. I'm Spur,
And I'm Coot.
and today's show is our fifth installment. This is for May, and it's going to be about gardening.
Gardening. I remember when I was a little old bitty kid, my daddy used to make me get out there and hoe them potatoes and hoe that corn and hoe just, whatever we had in the garden. I didn't understand. I thought it was more like punishment back then, but I'm glad I learned all that stuff.
Yeah, we've got some gardening efforts going this year. Before we get started too deep into this, I just want to say this is going to be a very relaxed show. Coot and I are drinking beer right now. We don't normally do that when we make these shows, but we wanted this to be a homey, very comfortable, casual show.
Kind of shooting off the cuff.
Kind of shooting off the cuff. This is the first time we're not going to have, we've never had it truly scripted, but we've always had an outline of what we were going to talk about. But this time we're not going to do that. We're just going to start talking about gardening. And first, I'm going to let Coot explain what we have here as far as acreage and all that.
Well, I've always said you got to play the hand you was dealt. And this Texas soil out here, it ain't nothing like back home. In other words, it's kind of a buckshot gumbo type stuff. And I just really didn't know what kind of gardening to make. Now, I'm way along on that garden. And, brother, it is looking good. I've got a couple of rows of okra. And last year I had a little old spot out here in the same location that was a lot smaller, and I had a little old row, maybe, I guess probably 70 feet, maybe 60 feet long, and it just put okra. And this year I've got 2 rows, and man, if we don't get tubs full of okra off of that, I don't know.
Well, in the 2 rows this year, what did we measure it at, 120 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're talking about a quarter of an acre we have carved out for a garden spot.
Yeah, and it's an old pasture, and I got in there and broke it up, and once I got it rode up like I wanted it and everything, I'm doing most of the work with a hand tiller. It seems like, the best way to go, rather than try to build a cultivator or something going back with a tractor.
Well, and this is a a rear tine Troy built that we picked up off of Craigslist. Bought it used. It's a good old tiller. And it's been working great.
Oh, it's doing everything I need it to. And then after the 2 rows of okra, we got 8 rows of corn. Now, I call it bread and butter. It's corn on the cob is 2 different colors. It's a yellow and a white. Y'all may call it something else, but bread and butter is what I've always called it, and it's always been a real good corn for me. Maybe if I lacked anything, it was getting a good stand. Not being used to working with this kind of dirt. And whenever I planted something, I more or less planted it to the depth I wanted it. And I started off with soaker hoses laying on top of the ground, getting the ground wet to get the seeds to come up, because, y'all live in Texas too, and you don't get rain just when you want it. You get it when you get it.
That's right. Now let's go back, and like I said, this is totally unscripted, but let's go back to the beginning now. Let's go back to, it's a grass pasture, right?
Grass pasture.
It's a grass pasture, and we took a fence and moved the fence and cut this pasture. It was a front pasture, and we cut it in half, basically. And it's where the donkeys live, but they have this whole side strip up the property as well, so we weren't taking away too much from them. It's on a hill. So it's high on the left if you're facing out toward the highway. It's high on the left and lower on the right. We thought it would be perfect, and we had to come up with some kind of irrigation system. You want to tell them about that?
Yeah, we got some good friends back in the home state of Arkansas, and they were good enough to get us some of these great big old plastic, what are they, 250?
Yeah, about 260
gallons. They gave us 4 of them, and we've got a line on getting some more, but we're lucky here. We've got a well. It's like a old cistern or something, but it just, we set a motor on top of that, and we can pull water up out of that well, and we got us some pipe laid all the way up to the top of the hill where we've got our tanks lined up, and then we bought some plastic tubing and stuff to hook into each one of these tanks one at a time, and we more or less pump them full out of that well. And when we need water, well, I've got this rig I made that'll do 3 middles at a time, and we hook that tubing onto the bottom of that big tank and open it up, and it flushes 3 middles at a time. Does great.
Yeah, and this is all PVC we're talking about, except for that blue. I call it gut, but
Yeah.
it's a plastic hose type thing, very
Right.
collapsible for irrigation purposes.
Yeah, and then when I planted we planted the 8 rows of peas, purple hull peas. I kind of the stuff that was in the tanks kind of skimmed my soaker hoses over. They wouldn't drip right, and so I more or less took a water hose and hooked it onto the bottom of those tanks one at a time, and just flooded that 8 rows of peas. Now this ground out here, it has its advantages. If you run water down one middle, you may water 3 rows at a time, because that water really soaks across them rows good.
Yeah, it does. It gets dry out there down to a certain depth, and then you hit gum, and then it
Right.
retains moisture.
And speaking of gum, I used to work on the farm back when I was a kid, and this man he probably had 900 acres he's working, and half of it was buckshot and half of it was sandy loam. And he taught me about as much as anything. He said, whenever you go to break this buckshot up, he said, just scratch the surface. Don't try to subsoil that stuff, because in the summertime when it dries up, you see them old cracks running down, and they may be 3 to 9 foot deep down in that soil. So it subsoiled itself. And he said, just break the top, plant the seeds in the gum, and let them come up. Of course, that's with a mechanical planter, but we was doing all this by hand, and we didn't have gum to plant it in. We planted it in dry dirt and then soaked it, and they came right up.
It did. It came right up. Now tell them the ingenious way you had for dropping them seeds down.
Oh yeah, the doctor the doctor told me at my age not to be bending over, and so we got us about a, what would you say, 3 or 4 foot piece of little old PVC pipe.
Yeah, 3.5, 4 feet.
And I took that little old tiller and got up on top of the rows and ran the little fur out with it. And we just went along, and I like my corn about 3 or 4 inches apart. Well, you just set the bottom of that tube, drop a grain of corn in it, and move it over 3 or 4 inches, and drop another one. And that's how we planted the corn. And then the peas, we planted them probably maybe 2.5 inches apart. I like them a little thicker.
All right, well, let's go over the garden now, because we have 2 rows of okra. How far apart did you plant those?
The seeds?
Yeah.
Maybe 2 or 3 inches.
2 or 3 inches. You drop 1 or 2 seeds or whatever.
Yeah, sometimes, you get in a hurry and you drop
Right.
2, you don't worry about it. Go on.
And then the corn, we have 8 rows.
8 rows, and we planted them probably 3 or 4 inches apart.
Yeah, and then the peas, we have 6 rows, I think.
8.
8,
Yeah.
8 rows.
And what I plan on doing is when that corn comes off, I'll probably go in there and whack those stalks down, break them rows up, and then I'm gonna have some late purple hull peas.
Yeah, these are, and I didn't mention these are purple hull.
Yeah, you can plant them things in July and August, and you can make some. They won't make as good, but.
And then after that, let's start on the high side.
All right, on the high side, I got 16 tomato plants. I've got 4 of them are what you call them little grape tomatoes. That's for my wife.
Tomatoes.
She likes them. And then just below that, I got I planted eggplants, seeds, and they didn't come up. The situation just wasn't right for them, so I wound up going and buying a couple of plants and set them out. And then right after that, I've got a bunch of zucchini squash, and it looked like almost every one of them came up. Then I planted some yellow crookneck squash, and I've only got 3 hills. That, like I said, that's the downfall. You just,
Hit or miss.
Yeah, getting that stand to come up.
Yeah.
And then below that, I've got probably 12 to 15 cucumbers. And if you noticed today, I don't know if you did, but
I did.
I set 2 posts, and I ran wire in the middle between the rows of the cucumbers, That way they can both grow toward the wire and then vine up that wire.
And I'll be posting, that picture will be up here right now as we're talking.
Oh, you got pictures, have you?
Well, I got the one you posted today.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to use it in the video, and it'll be up here right now while we're talking. But then after that, I want to go back and put the picture up of the tomatoes. Now, tell me, you put 2 T-posts on each end of the tomatoes.
Yeah, now, the only tomatoes I've got staked right now are the older ones. And I kind of had this in mind when I set those out. I thought, well, I'm going to wait a while and go buy more plants and put them out later. And that way you'll have ripe tomatoes longer, hopefully. And it looks like right now it's working that way because the last ones I set out, they're just blooming good.
Right.
But those others got like baseball-sized tomatoes
Yeah,
on them.
some of them are. Yeah. Now, what he did was he took a T-post and put one on each end of the tomatoes and then tied a cord on there, 2 cords, and then crisscrossed in between the tomatoes, like went around the plants and went to a strategic point on the limbs, crisscrossed and went around the next plant and so forth until he got to the next post and tied it off. Now, this is a cheap way. Instead of buying one of those little metal round things that sometimes people put over it, over each tomato plant, you can just run those strings through there, and you can adjust those strings as it gets older. And hell, if the plant gets too tall, you can just tie another cord on and go around again up higher.
Yeah, I never did trust those basket things that you stick down. They always fell over.
Yeah,
the weight of the tomatoes.
And I didn't like putting the wooden stakes in there because you hit roots, you know. And where you have these T-posts, there's no roots to hit.
And each T-post, I've got like 2 rows, and I put a T-post on the end of each row and went down 4 plants and put 2 more T-posts. Now, when my later tomatoes get ready, I'll stick 2 more T-posts and do them in the same fashion, zigzag that line back and forth. When you get down to that next pole, pull it tight and wrap it around that pole, and then come back the opposite direction and wrap it around tight. And then as your plants grow, you can take string and do the same thing. Just go move up higher on your post.
Yep. I never even thought about doing it that way before, but we'll have pictures up, like I said, right now. I'll go take a few pictures, maybe not today, but you know, it'll take us a few days to get this thing posted, get it edited. But yeah, I'll have pictures up, and I want to take some good pictures of so that you can see exactly what we're talking about as we're talking about it.
And then the next, the garden starts tapering down to a corner. And my next project is I've got 9 hills of watermelon. They're supposed to be really sweet. And after the 9 hills of watermelon, oh, by the way, spur of them watermelons had started blooming. And we found some blooms on them today. The cantaloupes are the last section over in the garden, and I've got, I believe I've got 6 hills of cantaloupes over there. So, like I said, I planted more than that, and it looked like every watermelon seed I dropped out there came up. But the cantaloupes, I've just bought one little old package and planted the seeds, and by the time I was getting over the last hills, I was planting 1 seed to the hill because it wasn't but just a few seeds in there. I might should have bought 2 packages, but anyway, I just didn't quite get to stand. But it's a beautiful little old thing if you once Spur gets these pictures up for you.
Oh yeah, and I'll take pictures of those watermelons and all. But right now, I'm going to crack another beer open, and that's proof that we are drinking beer. These are 16-ounce beer because I have 16.
I got these little eyedroppers over here, these 12-ounce cans.
Yeah, I don't mess around. But yeah, I can't wait. And I'm glad the watermelons are blooming now because I cannot wait to get into some of that vine ripened stuff. That's the best part.
Yeah, and I think the secret to it all is the donkey dung.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. See, we have donkeys and llamas on property as guard animals, and so they have a life of Riley. All they have to do is walk around and eat grass and eat. We feed a little treat feed here and there, and keep the coyotes away.
Yeah,
that's really all their job is. But they poop a lot.
In the same spot. These donkeys, just like they're trained to do that, we've got a certain place we feed them hay and kibble, you call it. give them a treat in the morning, one evening, and that's usually where they do their droppings, and we have to take the tractor and scoop that up and move it out. Well, next year we're fixing to start moving it to the garden, and we're going to cover the whole thing and till it under.
Yeah, and that's important to note that when you plant things in soil, the plants actually take away from the soil. Now, this is not rocket science. I mean, the plants have to eat. They're getting nutrients. They're getting things out of that soil. And if you plant over and over and over again on the same soil, you can deplete that soil. But if you put fertilizer on it every year, and we're going to use donkey dung, and we're making a compost pile out of that donkey dung now in the edge of the woods, and we're just going to go scoop it, spread it over the garden next year, and then run that disc over it behind that tractor.
Yeah, and back in the day, I remember, I'd say back in the 50s and 60s, you ever heard of a cover crop? These farmers back in Arkansas, they would take a 100-acre field and they would plant it in what you call vetch or something like that. And that stuff would vine out, and the only reason they planted it in there was take a big old disc, turn it under to replenish that garden or the ground, and then they would plow all that under. Well, if you get to thinking about it, donkey poop ain't nothing but a bunch of hay and grass with very little. Well, that kibble you feed them, I'm gonna tell you what, it smells like a day's work chewing tobacco.
Yeah, it's oats and it's molasses. Yeah, I got a little molasses.
I tell you what, makes me want to chew tobacco every time I smell it.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot about the plants and blooming and all that, but I've seen you out there, Coot, with that rear tine tiller running between those rows. And I've seen you do that several times.
Yeah, and that corn's so big you can't even see the tiller.
Right, but why do you do that?
Well, once you finally get a rain out here and that ground crust is over real good, it's very important. And I have taken a hoe around those tomato plants, the first 8 that I set out, and just break that ground up right up real close to that plant, dangerously close. Now, you don't want to cut your plant down, but the way I run that tiller in those 30-inch middles, I'll move that thing all the way over to the left and barely miss that corn or barely miss those peas and get that tiller in there just dangerously close and break that soil up. It's very important you get air in your soil. If you plant a garden, and of course you got to keep the grass and weeds out. If you don't do that, you've lost your garden.
Well, and I thought that's what you were doing, is just weeding it with that tiller, but you're actually aerating.
Yeah, you aerate that soil. And it seems like every time you do it, them plants will just start jumping, and it's beautiful once you get the middles all cleaned out and tilled it up good. But it's beneficial to those plants. You get that, you loosen that soil, and those plants roots will run toward those middles. Now, a little later on, when I have to start watering them, of course, that's the only thing I can do is run the water down between the rows. And that's really going to make those roots, they're already out there. I'll have to quit tilling it at a point, because once your plants start blooming and the corn's tossling now, I ran through it again today, and this may be the last trip I get to do on it.
Because once those limbs or the leaves start sagging, they'll pull it down.
Right, when you get to a certain point, then you're not benefiting the plant, you're hurting it. If you till it when it gets too old, I believe.
So what measurement did you set your rows on?
30 inches.
30-inch rows. So it's 30 inch from row middle to row middle?
Yeah, or row top to row top.
Yeah.
And theoretically now, and this is one of my faults, when I opened those furrows up for those okra, I did that with a hoe, and I tend to stay on one side of that row too much. It's just always been a fault of mine. But then when I got over to the corn, I ran the middles out just as deep as I could get them with that little old tiller. And then I took the plow and got right up on top of the row and just lightly opened up a furrow. And you can keep it up in the middle of the row. So I did a lot better job running the furrows for the corn and the peas. And then you drop the peas and you just peas and corn, I like to plant them about 1/2 to 3/4 inch deep because it's dry dirt, and when that dirt gets wet, it's going to settle, and so your seeds are about 1/2 inch under the ground. And like I said, I've had done 2 or 3 things on watering them to get them up, and finally I just flooded the 8 rows that the peas were on, and it worked just as good. Of course, I bought the tomato plants, and you dig a hole, and you run that hole full of water, and you take your little cup off your plant, and you set that plant down that hole and ease that dirt all around it, and then I just watered the fire out of them, and they just caught a hold and took off.
Yeah, and not, it's one of those things where I'm trying to, in these videos or these vlogs here, to really give some useful information. And I think, a lot of people may be a little intimidated by that big of a garden, but from what I've seen, once you get going on it, you got to keep up with it. That's for sure.
Well, if you're intimidated by a big garden, now back home, back in Arkansas when we lived there, I think I had probably 8 rows, and I don't know, they couldn't have been very long because put them in the corner of the backyard. You probably remember that.
Oh, I do.
And
I bet they were
and
60 feet.
And I had my cucumbers the last row so they could grow up the yard fence.
Yep.
So if you're intimidated by a big garden, start off little.
Yep.
And then once you think you got a handle on it, then, if you can grow and get you a bigger spot or whatever, then, work into it.
Well, and we have a tractor, and we do have a
disc,
attachment to go on the back of it. But that's about all we use that tractor for on this garden, is just breaking it up initially, and then he's used the little Troy-built rear tine tiller for almost everything else.
Yeah, I got out there and I plowed and I plowed and I plowed, and with that disc, breaking that old gum up deep enough, and it was, when I got through, it was all unlevel and everything, and I took my grater blade and put it on back the tractor and turned it around backwards and drug it and leveled all that off.
Yeah, and there was probably a lot of rocks to get out of there as well.
Oh yeah, and there's still a lot out there because every time you till it, you're gonna till one up.
Right. Yeah, when you go too deep. Well, I think that's probably enough of this show. If anybody has any questions for us about this, if there was something we didn't cover that you wanted us to cover, just ask us in the comment section below, and we'll check it and we'll get back with you. And if we get too many questions, we may make a follow-up recording on this to answer some of those questions.
That's right.
And that'd be fine.
Be fine.
But we're going to wrap this up for now and keep this show to a respectable level.
I'm Coot.
And I'm Spur, and don't forget to subscribe.